Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Good to have you here. Again, for another serious Talk Saturday, of course, as we take on left brain topics, right brain topics, figure out where they impact and intersect and how they impact your life. And we've been taking on the 35 questions you've probably never asked yourself, but kudos if you have. And of course, we're on number 16 out of the 35.
16. All right, so we're like almost halfway.
We're getting there. But it's a good thing because we've been having awesome conversations. We've been having amazing people join us, share their thoughts, their philosophies, and their understandings of the questions, because not just about the information within the question, but like also in a way we've gotten in talks about how the question is asked and what does it actually mean. There are many different perspectives and many different ways that you could answer some of these questions, and especially based on where you're from. What culture do you consider yourself a part of, because that can impact your response as well. So we've had some really good conversations and debates back and forth, especially last Saturday. We had some great ones going on as well, diving into these questions. So thus far, it's been a blast, and thank you everyone who's been joining us on Twitch for this, as well as for those of you that are joining us via podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Player FM, Stitcher FM, you name it. Thank you very much for following, for hanging out with us every single week as we dive into this.
So, today's question-a-thon begins with, what does honor mean to you? How important is it to you? I'm going to put that question in chat as well, so everybody can see.
And talking about chat, thank you very much for joining us, Mario Man, Crazy Doc, Smitty, Denise. Let's see as I keep rolling up here. Fused Fury, Mario Man. Let's see, keep going through Denise. Going through so many things, happening, some great conversations. But thank you all very much. For those lurking, of course, in the background, just hanging out with us today, thank you as well. We appreciate you being here.
So honor, what does that mean to you? I have to say, before I looked up the definition of honor, I always felt like it was some concept that I always heard about in like military movies, or where there were like warriors of some sort, like some fantasy, medieval type of thing. And I always thought it had something to do with sort of that whole aspect, something with fighting, or some sort of a disciplined fighting platform, as it were.
Sure, yeah.
Right, and a lot of people talking about like, dying with honor, and then have you no honor when they did something dishonorable, and of course you hear about people getting discharged dishonorably and all that other stuff. So I always thought it had something to do with a concept that wasn't necessarily familiar to me, and I sort of had this vague, fuzzy idea of what it was, and in my head, I sort of equated it to integrity. So, having honor, doing things with honor, sort of doing them with integrity and that kind of thing. Then I looked up what it actually meant, and it's sort of still like that for me, but it has to do with respect, and having, you can say too of it, oh, that was my honor, or it's an honor to meet you, and that is more about having a privilege to meet somebody, or a distinction, that kind of thing. But I think, kind of going back to what I imagined honor to be, when I heard it in other context, or in its context, to me that still stands a little bit. It is about integrity. It's about how you handle yourself, right? And that could be respect for yourself and your actions, and respect for your environment and other people. So I think my definition kind of still works in my head. And how important it is to you, that's an interesting question, because I definitely didn't walk around my life, thinking about honor and what that meant, and, was I living with honor and that kind of thing. It always felt like this kind of far away thing that I didn't have to deal with, don't have to bother myself with. And then, of course, there's games that came out, right? There's For Honor.
And Dishonored.
And so again, kind of in that fighting sort of aspect. But the games themselves, I think, certainly with Dishonored, deals with a lot of other kind of concepts. But again, it comes back to the sort of like personal integrity for me. So, it's important to me. It's not something that I think about like consciously. Like if somebody does something, I guess, dishonorable, I don't look at it and like, that was dishonorable. But when I hear the word, I get an idea of what has maybe occurred. Someone's integrity kind of let them down, or they didn't have any. But yeah, I definitely don't go through life, I guess, just thinking about it or living it or not living it. I just, I guess I just assume that I do and don't think about it because the other sort of options don't really present themselves to me. It's not like I think about them,
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm in a particular situation, I don't think, oh, I can act dishonorably here. It's sort of just, no, I'm going to act like myself. And usually myself tends to be pretty on par with my personal integrity. Kind of a thing, I think I would say. It's an interesting question.
Well, I guess then from there, going to my end, I at least when I was younger, I think the honor concept is very familiar as to yours in the sense of something militaristic or something to have to do with doing something within combat. That was just a lot of what you heard, as you mentioned too, doing something and being honorably discharged or being dishonored. A lot of that, of course, the terminology for me came from like a lot of martial art films or films inspired by the samurai, where honor is very important, and that kind of phrase constantly keeps basically peering its head around the corner. It's always there, like about someone's honor, someone's integrity, someone's, I guess, ability to abide by the rules and regulations of a specific community, of a specific sector or area. I mean, in a way, I guess there are some ethics or morals that always transcend no matter the culture, which then you could say if you break that, you're not very honorable in a way. But I think overall, though, honor is very much the eye of the beholder too. So it's very much based on the rules of the culture that you're in. What would be considered honorable in Japan would be vastly different, for example, though there of course can always be some similarities or crossover. But to say that of someone in maybe Mexico or someone in America or Canada or what have you, the idea, for one thing, of being very loyal to one's family can be considered very honorable over others who say, well, just being there for society as a whole could be very honorable, or at least not, if you will, based on certain terms of agreement. Like within warfare, there are certain terms of agreement in a weird way, where, for instance, you don't go after the medics. You don't, if you see medics on the other side, you're not really supposed to be going after them and pinpointing them down and killing them. You're actually breaking the kind of the rules of warfare in a way by doing such acts.
It's interesting because in video games, I feel like it's the opposite. Go for the medics. Go
for the healer. Take down the healer. And there are weapons too that are just not allowed to be used in warfare. Otherwise, you're actually you could be losing or breaking many treaties and other things with other companies. It feels like it in a way. Other countries.
Right.
And thus, in a way that's like you are dishonoring yourself by doing such acts. But again, these are all things that are agreed upon based on the people, based on the situation. So, I feel like honor itself is fairly fluid in a way. I think there are some things that still stand that do cross over no matter the group of people. Or the situation per se, but I think overall it is very fluid just based on that cultural lens. But overall, I would say, yeah, honor is that integrity, whatever that integrity is that is being pushed by that culture. And, of course, you can be dishonorable without even meaning to as well. It's very easy if you're not familiar with certain cultures to act dishonorably. Whether, like, for instance, in the U.S., it's not really a big thing for many people to go out to a bar, get plastered, and barely make it home, right? But in other countries, that could be considered very dishonorable because your actions do impact those of your family, friends, those who you tend to connect with. They see that connection, and what you do does impact those that you are connected with.
Like you're a direct representative of your clan, of your family clan.
Exactly right. And so again, in certain places it may not be considered dishonorable, in others it will be considered, and it may be by accident. You don't mean to. So honor is a very interesting thing, for sure, just like many other terms that we can throw out there. But I think overall, as for importance, I think overall it is important. I think you should. What do I want to say? I think you should go by what works best for everyone, not just yourself or not just one individual, but looking out for the whole. And that's my perspective. And of course, there are situations where people can debate that and be like, well, what about this very specific situation or this very specific situation? But I think overall, it's just, what is considered honorable to you, to the culture, and just in the end, what actions can you take that best impact everyone in a positive nature? And that to me is being honorable. And I think that then at that point is important. I think you should be investing not just in yourself, but those around you, and that you should be helping everyone grow. I think that's really important, at least those that are willing to accept it. You know what I mean? You can't force people who don't want to grow in that direction to grow in that direction, right? But I think overall, though, that's the way of being honorable to me. And I think it is important to represent you to the best version of you that you can be, because that not is only for looks, but just helps you be a better person. Ideally, hopefully, knock on wood.
Well, and I think if you sort of act in accordance to your own personal integrity, it makes you be at peace with yourself, and it makes you, I think in some ways, less insecure about who you are as a person, which in turn is better not only for yourself, but for those around you. So I definitely think that's something that's important, because it's interesting you talk about honor in a little bit of a grander sense where you include others, and I feel like for me honor is very much something that's personal to myself, because again, the way that I see it, that if your actions, your thoughts, and your belief systems are all in accordance with each other, at the end of the day you're going to feel pretty good about yourself, and that's going to allow you to be the honorable person in public as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely an important part of it too, when we mention the cultural perspective, but also what is your perspective, like what feels right and wrong to you, like following that kind of moral compass in a way, because if the culture demands something very specific that you just cannot agree with. There are several cultures where, again, perhaps for minor crimes, you could be beheaded. That's very much a situation where
minor, huh?
Yeah. No. For I'm not saying that beheading is minor. I'm saying that their actions could have been minor. That they could have stole something small, like a candy bar.
That doesn't feel minor at that point. Like, dang,
right, because
they're beheading you.
Yeah, because of the response.
Yeah,
and even though, like, say, the government and the general culture over time has accepted that, that doesn't mean that individuals can feel good about it, right? And can feel acceptable. And they could actually consider that dishonorable, which, again, is where some of these words can be very fluid, and it's very hard to figure out for sure, what is considered. Because you just kind of have to go based off of instinct and based off your moral compass and how you feel. Do you not agree with this? Then don't let that be the honorable thing and just let it go. Either figure out a new culture, figure out ways to change things in a positive direction. And again, it sounds easier than what it really is, but that's kind of the general concept behind it. Yeah, and I agree. So just going to that moral compass of what impacts you in your life too. If you're feeling horrible because something is repressive in a way or feels that way, then yeah, I think you should question that and look at that and see and try to figure out ways of making things work for you that then also positively impact everyone else. Because again, that does lead, because everything starts from you. I mean, right? You are the initial propulsion or the catalyst for all actions, right? That you do. It is on you. So, you have to feel good about what you're doing, and that again, even innately or unconsciously, can be passed on to others, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, what they tell you in conflict resolution as well is, the emotion that you exude out will be reflected back to you. So if somebody is talking to someone who is feeling anxious or ragey or whatever it might be, if you yourself appear calm as you talk to them, eventually they too will pick up on that, and maybe they won't calm down 100% right away, especially if they are ragey about something that they're ragey about, that they have every right to be ragey about, but it will allow them to sort of calm down and have a better conversation, hopefully.
Be able to move forward a little bit more positively in a way.
Exactly. And we have some great chat. Just wanted to read some of this. Sharpie121 says, I'd say honor is standing by your values during difficult times. Exactly. Like that's definitely part of that, like, personal integrity, right? Like, what are you doing not only when no one is watching, but what are you doing when it's not going so swimmingly well as well? Crazy Doc references Klingons. They sure talk about honor a lot. And in Klingon in the new Star Trek series. Which is an interesting choice that we should all talk about in a further episode. Denise Degree says, honor is extremely important to me because I live by the meaning of it. I'm all about respect. To me, it's what I try to achieve in everyday life. I'm not perfect, but I am respectful. I hear that.
And people can say, right, that's an honorable thing to do, is to, even though you're not perfect at something, to continue at it because you're looking to improve on it and become better.
Mario Man says, to me, honor means doing the right thing even if it's the most difficult way, such as given the choice of doing something for someone that could help them or doing something to further yourself, even if it means hurting someone else. I consider it having honor treating others how you want to be treated, even if you don't get treated how you want to be treated. And that can be difficult, right? It's hard to keep doing something also that doesn't seem to get returned a lot of the times or ever. And that again goes back to how do you keep that up, right? And like Evin was mentioning, that is something that comes from within, right? You sort of have to rally yourself to keep oning.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just making up verbs here left and right.
Keep on keeping on.
And hello everybody who's just joining us in chat. Thank you, welcome. And
Mario Man also says too, I feel morals and honor are closely tied together, maybe no definitive, but chances are someone with no morals is not going to have much of, if any, honor. Which is very fair assessment as well.
And I think in a previous episode we did talk about ethics and morals, and sort
yes.
of where do those come from, quote unquote. Is it something intrinsic or not? We had a good chat about that as well.
And Infuse says too here, as I just kind of read ahead here, for me to be able to look at myself during the most testing of times and know I was able to treat everybody how I would have liked to be treated if the shoe was on the other foot. And it's very important for me, granted I haven't always done it, but being able to identify where I went wrong made me a better person, I think.
Oh, for sure, right? And we talk about, whenever you look at your own progress that you've made with yourself for something that you wanted to improve on, right? Like, you have to look at yourself, a few days ago, a few months ago, a few years ago, right? And if you're going to kind of either compare or contrast your own progress, it has to be your own progress. And yeah, understanding that everybody is different, everybody starts at a different spot. But that's always key too, to be able to look at, maybe where you may have gone wrong and learn from that, instead of letting that make you feel like worse or bad, or make you rage or something like that, right? Which is also hard when playing video games. And I know myself, like, I'm a perfectionist, and I think that I do things in a certain way, and when I fall short of that way, it doesn't even matter if anybody else points it out or sees it or notices it or anything. But if I notice it and I point it out to myself, I get so angry at myself. But it comes out, it gets expressed as I'm angry at everything else. Because it's hard to reconcile that with yourself, right? It's hard to be like, no, you're the dumbass. Like, no, I'm not. That's not my vision. I have cognitive dissonance here. I got to fix it. It's not my fault. So it is very important to do that, for sure. Yeah,
well, and I think too that fairness, I just want to throw out another word here. I think fairness is also most often connected with honor as well. If you think about, because you were mentioning games, of course, we're on Twitch, and we do the game streams as well. And, a lot of people would say that people who are considered glitchers, so those are those individuals who are using glitches or even hacks to have an advantage in a video game, would be ones that just really don't have any honor, right? They're not... what they have, they've not earned. What they are doing takes no skill within the game mechanics, right? It takes skill to hack and to utilize glitches properly. There is that, to give them can't believe I'm giving them some credit here, but there is some. But overall, that skill that the game has provided within the mechanics, they are not utilizing properly, and therefore many people would say, well, they just don't have any honor. And at that point, too many would say too, well, what's the point of that win? It was not honorable, did not test your skills, it did not push you to become better, it did not push you to fully utilize your tool set, at least the legal tool set within the game, outside of the glitches, and thus leaving you to be dishonorable. So that's just something I wanted to point out too, especially put it within a framework of video games, being as we are on Twitch and everything, then you bringing that up.
Games.
Also Trunk here says, honor to me is closely related to integrity, so keeping to your values on the face of adversity. So again, being able to stick to your guns, if you will, even if that means you have to work against something. And he also says, honor is very important to me, one of the cornerstones of how I want myself to be.
Dang. And here I am. I was like, I barely think about honor. I just kind of like hang out and do my stuff. People in chat are like, no, this is what I live by. I'm like, nice.
Well, again, I think some of that too is that moral compass, right? You may not think about it, but you feel it in a way. You kind of feel that certain drive, or that certain internal voice, as they call it, that drives you to go, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Maybe no.
If I see a person walk across the street, maybe I shouldn't run them over with my car. Just saying, that's probably not a good idea. And usually, too, it's not because people think, usually, if you think otherwise, you're an asshole. But usually, people don't think, oh, well, it's illegal to run over that person, so I'm not going to do it. No, it's...
Or like, I don't want to damage my car. So.
Right. Usually it's like, I don't want to hurt that person or get anyone else hurt, so I'm going to let them cross and not hit them. And then comes in the fact of like, okay, this person is pissing me off, but yeah, if I hit them at this point, now it's also illegal. So I think that's like kind of like a support to the honor. Like, by the way, if you go dishonorable...
Yeah, I mean, I do think people do a lot of... or don't do a lot of things because they fear consequences, whether they are known or unknown consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're not sure what might happen, they fear that, I'll just rather not do it.
Let's just not play around with that right now.
Let's just not.
I know snakes bite. Let's not try poking it with a stick and just see what happens.
Actually, funny story, I think.
Is it
That's a
about
story.
poking snakes?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
It's about fearing unknown consequences.
From snakes?
No.
Oh, okay.
There's no snakes in this story.
I was just making sure.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
I was trying to make a connection here. Okay, you go right ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's when I first started driving by myself after I got my driver's license, and I remember, like my parents and, well, I guess everybody in general just like put the fear of the police in me like nobody's business. Like, I was so afraid of even seeing a police car because I was afraid they would just like arrest me like on the spot. And I don't know where or how that irrational fear kind of started, but it was there. So I remember the first time I was driving without my dad being there, because I had my license, I could just drive by myself, and I'm driving, and literally that first time a police car like pulls next to me at a red light. Like, we're both stopped, we're at a red light, I didn't do anything. I immediately was like, oh my God, I can't look over there. If I look over there, they'll be like, oh my gosh, she's a criminal, and they're like gonna arrest me. Those are my exact thoughts. I'm 19 years old at this point, because yes, I got my license very late. And I was so afraid of looking at the other car. Like, what? I was so afraid of the consequences, and it didn't make no sense, because I did not know anybody. I'd never heard a story about someone looking at a cop car and getting instantly arrested.
Well,
but I had never heard of it up until then. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But yeah, and then, but I did look. I did one of those side glances, like, oh, what's that over there? Oh my God, cops! Okay, and turn around. And they of course were paying no attention to me. But anyways, that's my story.
So it's kind of like irrational fear, or like
definitely irrational. Yeah, I'm just saying. I think a lot of people, I imagine a lot of people doing some of the things or not doing some of the things in regards to maybe honor or something, because of fear of consequences.
Okay.
It's that fear of the unknown, fear of you're not really sure what's going to happen.
It's kind of hard for someone to be dishonorable when they're afraid of everything. So it's not like they can't take the actions anyway if they wanted to, because they're just so afraid of the response.
Exactly. Yeah. Although there is of course the distinction between taking action, right, and having the thoughts, which can also be discussed in a future episode. Having thoughts versus taking action.
And actually, we were talking about the complexity of the word honor itself, and Trunk actually says honor is somehow interesting in that the verb is transitive, so you honor someone, and the noun describes something we view as reflexive or even intrinsic.
Right, because you say you have honor, like I have the honor of speaking with you, or something like that. But then you honor somebody, you sort of put a medal up somewhere, or you distinguish them in some way, in some action form.
Right, exactly.
That is interesting. I wonder what it is like in other languages, actually. I never thought about that. That's fascinating all around.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the goal of it is that you honor someone that has been honorable, because it's the honorable thing to do. It's very cyclical, right? It's like, oh, well, someone was very honorable, so you should honor that fact and honor the fact that they were being honorable, which is also honorable. But also Denise says too, I try to be a perfectionist because it's a struggle, or I try and not be a perfectionist because it's a struggle to achieve.
It is a struggle.
Which again, it's like, don't ever reach perfection, because there's no such thing as it. And this actually, so I'll tell you something. So we were doing a storytelling workshop with a bunch of entrepreneurs in Boston, and we were trying to tell them basically, how do you tell your story? How do you connect with other people? What are the emotional aspects, the psychological aspects, and why is it so important to do? And one thing I said is, don't be perfect with it, because so many people are concerned. They were just like, well, but what if I don't tell my story in the right way? And it's like, well, only you know your story, and only you can tell it the right way, because you know what that story is. The audience that is listening doesn't know your story. So that's okay. They're not going to point out something be like, oh, you kind of goofed on this. Or I would say that doesn't really, no, that doesn't really work.
You're wrong.
It's like, no, it's your story, damn it. Like, own it. Grab it, take it, run with it, right? And I remember saying, so don't be a perfectionist because there's no such thing as perfection. And I swear to you, a woman got so pissed off at me for saying that. And she absolutely hated me, but absolutely loved Tatiana and made sure to go up to Tatiana and be like, I really like what you did. I don't know about the other guy. I don't agree with him at all. I don't really appreciate that. And I was like, well, that's fine. Not everyone's going to agree. But there really isn't anything concerning perfection, right? Perfection is a concept that a lot of times is constantly changing, especially as we get older and learn more about things and start to take in what is honorable, what is not honorable, and what have you, and putting that more into how we run our lives. So that sense of perfection is always changing, and I won't say it's always growing or evolving, but it is always kind of adapting in a way based on our situation, based on what we're going through and what it is. So, you know, I would say never, again, push yourself for perfection, but as we've said in the past, always try to make yourself better than you were prior. You know, judge yourself not based on hypotheticals, on general concepts per se, as much as, you know, where were you a month ago in comparison to where are you now? Where were you a year ago in comparison to where are you now? And if that happens to go along with what you consider honorable, great. At least you can see progression, which is really success at that point, than actually reaching some kind of end goal, which honestly, in things like this, are in a way unachievable. You know, it very much so. Just things happen. Shit happens, as the saying goes. You can't control everything either. And a lot of times you can't control, you know, how you respond to certain situations. You know, we don't have a playbook that tells you, okay, well, in this specific situation, you must act A, B, C, and D. You know, it just doesn't work out that way. Life is not clean like that. And so, you know, it's very important to make sure that you follow what you feel is right, but at the same time, don't beat yourself up because, you know, well, it's not perfect enough or it doesn't fit, you know, the textbook that I've written in my head. And I think that's really the key of it too.
And life isn't perfect. And by life, I mean like nature, like the planet. Genetics, like things, I mean, everything. Or
what would be considered perfect, right? There are a lot of accidents, there are a lot of whoopsies, and all of a sudden we have this thing and that thing, and you're like, well, damn.
Evolution is one big whoops. Oh, well, that worked out.
You know, and unfortunately, you could say that about, you know, some kids that were born. You know, the parents go, whoops, dear. That happened.
Well, they do say that.
But, you know, it worked out. It worked out great. You know, yeah, Timmy, you were totally planned. We love you.
Denise says, I'm progressively getting older. No, you know what, Denise? You're progressively getting wiser. Yeah? Even though it's funny because I look at myself and I'm like, I feel like I was much smarter back when I was younger. I don't know what happened.
Well, and even older is an accomplishment, and Trunk mentions this. I mean, hell yeah, you're still kicking.
That's true, yeah.
You've not killed anyone that we know of, and you've not, you know... And, you know, you've not done something stupid or crazy to get yourself killed, right? I mean, you are still here. You know, you have family and you have kids. You have all this stuff going on. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's actually really good. You know, I feel like people, once they get to, like, I was going to say level 30. I shit you not. I was going to say level 30. I'm playing too many games.
Level 30.
Like, once you get to 30, I feel like everyone, like, fucking freaks out and is like, oh my god, I got this expiration date on my forehead. Oh my god, I'm so old. Oh my god, everything is gonna go downhill. And
yeah, especially on Twitch, I see that. Like, people say, oh, I'm so old. I'm like, how old are you? 31. Okay, you know what?
I've seen people say 24, and I'm like, shut the fuck up. Don't give me that shit. God, 24, shut up. I'm so old. I'm buying my Depends tomorrow and my Metamucil. I'm gonna meet my friend Frank at the deli. We're gonna play some gin rummy. Shut the fuck up. So...
Tell us how you really feel.
But, you know, it's like you don't have a goddamn expiration date on your head, you know? If something happens, something happens, you know what I mean? It just is what it is. So it's like, you know, stop doing that. You know, getting older is a good thing. You know, it is honorable to age and to exist and to live and move forward, I think, so...
Yeah, well, it wasn't that long ago, too, where our life expectancy was much lower. So I don't know if people are still sort of like hanging on to that, or, no, you know what? I blame marketing on that. That's what I'm blaming advertising.
Oh, yeah, you got all these financial
That's what I'm
institutions,
blaming.
for instance, who are like, oh, you know, you're 30, which means you had to have saved for retirement at the age of 12. And, you ideally should be retiring by the age of 65. Mm-hmm.
But,
Give us your money.
Let kids be kids, y'all. Okay, wait.
Get the hell out of here. Same response to the 24-year-olds going, I'm old as shit. Get out of here.
But Trunk asks, what if you have gin and a nice computer gaming setup in your retirement home? Well, in that case, sign me up. But I will take ice cream instead of gin.
That's fair. That actually to me is a fair change up. I'll take that.
But like lactose-free ice cream.
Unless it was whiskey, then I'll be like, nah, you keep your ice cream.
Because genetics, man.
I'll take the whiskey. I'm saying gin, not so much whiskey. There we go. That was actually question number 37 out of 35 questions you may never have asked yourself.
Gin or ice cream in your retirement home?
That's right. Most people, about 7 out of 10, say ice cream. There we go.
As long as there's lactate pills or lactose-free ice cream, I think I'm good.
There we go. But yeah, let's see here, just to make sure to check up in chat too. I don't think I'm getting old, just getting older because things hurt that didn't used to. I mean, that's a fair thing, right? There's a difference between being old and just getting older, right? I mean, you do a lot of wear and tear on your body, depending on diet, depending on movement and work and habits and everything else. Like that all comes into play. Exactly. Yeah. And so, the best you can do is work with it, right? Is to move forward and see, how can I work with this? How can I make it better and improve it as best as I can based on what I'm working with now, and that's all you can do. So, and there's good honor in that, getting older rather than just old.
Bringing it back. Though Fuse says, I wish I was 24 again. Being able to go to clubs without giving disapproving looks at all the inappropriately dressed teens complaining about the music.
Fused at 24 was like, Fused at, 31, I was like, girl, get a towel on. What is that? Not supposed to wear your bathing suit to the club? What the hell? Get out of here.
Also, teens are going to clubs? Is that even legal?
Oh, yeah. Even when I was, in high school.
Oh, you just can't drink? Is that what it is?
Yeah, they have, teen nights.
Quote, unquote.
Yeah, they have teen nights. Yeah.
Teen nights?
Yeah, you could be, as long as you're 13, sometimes 12, depending on the situation, but 13. Places are desperate for cash. They'll do anything. They don't care who they're dealing with. Plus, okay, fine. They don't have to worry about alcohol on those nights because teen night.
Huh. Oh, you know what? I guess I'm thinking of teens, early teens, 12, 13-year-olds. We're talking, 17,
No,
18?
I'm not, though. I just said.
Oh.
I literally just said. I'm saying, some clubs do allow for teen nights. 12, 13, 14, 15. Because they don't have to deal with alcohol. It's extra money to them.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Wow. No joke.
I don't even know.
No Kappa. No Kappa.
I don't know Kappa here. What is the next question?
So, the next question that we have today is, what are the most important factors in maintaining a well-functioning society? We had a similar one about relationships, so this is going to be interesting. And what does it mean for a society to function well? So again, what are the most important factors in maintaining a well-functioning society? And what does it mean for a society to function well in the first place? So what does it mean, and how do you do it? What is your daddy, and who is your daddy? What does he do? There we go. That was the Schwarzenegger quote. Yes. So, what is considered a well-functioning society, and what does that include? What are the important factors? And yes, that's a long-ass question, by the way. It's actually 2 questions, so they're cheating.
We've kind of have a few questions that are 2-part questions,
They're
but
cheating.
it's really just for.
They're cheating.
It's this would have been 70 questions otherwise.
That's pretty epic, though. Think about that.
Yeah.
The 70 questions you've never asked yourself.
The MindMine podcast is now 1 year full of just us answering questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say no to that. But yes. So what are the most important factors in maintaining a well-functioning society?
I mean, we could go back to the previous question in the sense of that having an honor system can come into play, or what could be considered more of like a judicial, an honorable judicial system where people just understand, have it laid out point blank, like this is what's going to help society, so therefore this is okay to do, while these other things are not. But again, that requires also not only honorable, but just a fair and honorable judicial system, which not many countries see nowadays, because a lot of times they're outdated or many other factors. So I would think that that would be something that would help with a well-functioning society. I think like with anything else, right? Like when you're starting up a business, when you're, when you have a family and you start to grow the family, there are certain rules and things that we put into place just to make sure that everyone is kind of like on the same foundation, right? To try to minimize conflict, or if there is that conflict, we at least understand then how to appropriately handle it. And I think that's very important for a society to have in order to function. Honestly, there might be many governments that we may disagree with in other countries or what have you, or in our own, whatever it may be. But, overall, that doesn't mean that the society itself doesn't function well to a point, right? Now, again, there are many gray areas to that. But I think to start, like if we had to go, okay, let's say we're playing a game like The Sims or something, right? Where, or Civilization or something, where it's like, okay, we have this group of people, well, first they need food, they need shelter just to survive. But as you start adding on more people, you need to have sort of these rules and regulations or these understandings of what's considered ethical, while, again, incorporating that moral compass of ours that we've been talking about, thus kind of leading to a set of honor codes that help get put in place. That way people, again, understand what's right, what's wrong, understand that there are impacts or certain things that will happen, consequences otherwise, that will happen for actions that are not considered fair, right, or just. And again, people can disagree with that, and that's totally fine, because this is all based on perspective, and not everyone's going to, agree with these things, of course. But I think overall that's very important, because again, looking at it from like a business perspective, you don't just start up a business and go, okay, that's rock and roll, right? We're going to sell stuff, or we're going to, make things. No, like you first have to understand, well, what's the flow of the company? Who are the people that we need within this company? What are their goals? What are their duties daily, monthly, annually? How do they impact and interact with everyone else? Like, you just need this kind of structure. It's just like building it's like building a building, right? You need to figure out, okay, well, first we need a foundation. What does that foundation consist of? What kind of materials are we going to do, or do we need? Which then helps you better understand, okay, great, we need XYZ materials, which means we have to go to these locations, get materials, bring them back. This is how we bring them in. This is how we put it all together. And thus also helping you with the overall structure as you move up, as you build out that society, as you build out that unit, whatever it may be. So I think like that's really important and just very helpful. It just really helps the flow to help minimize certain conflicts. There's always going to be conflict. I'm not saying all conflict's going to disappear poof just like that. But I do feel like it will help initial conflicts that come from just not understanding, not being aware, not or confusion, right? If you've laid out enough of the tracks in advance for people. So that would be my kind of way of building that framework for a well-functioning society. And of course, what does it mean? I think I've kind of answered that in a way of where people just understand, like, when I'm here, when I'm a part of this group, this is what works. This is what doesn't work. These are the expectations. And be able to, at least to a point, follow said expectations while still also following your moral compass, your honor-based systems. Because again, as I said too, you're not always going to agree with that. And then having to figure out, and that's a good thing too, right? Because at least well, this community or whatever is not for me. Maybe I should move. Maybe I should try another tribe. Maybe I should try another community then that I feel does uphold the things that I hold very dear to me as well. So I think that that's also important as well, from at least a individual perspective, that as long as that's laid out, you can also make those decisions to a point. Again, lots of gray areas. I get it. But to just initially start the conversation.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I would say I agree with the fact that it would be wonderful if we could all, like, have a list of, here's all the little society bubbles everywhere. This one's about this one's about that. Where do you want to live? Click a button and poof, you're there. Because I feel like that would, even at this stage, solve like 90% of our problems. Like if you were just surrounded in a, and in a place surrounded by the things that actually made you happy, made you feel the way that you would like to feel, and there's people there and they can all support each other in the way that everybody needs to, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. Actually, Alastair Reynolds in his books, in one of the universes that he's created, people up in space, basically we have colonized like hundreds of places, and people have gone and created their own like biodomes, if you will, like their own little society bubbles, literally on like very specific niched societies. Like there's one, is totally extreme, but there's one where people didn't want their limbs, and so to be accepted in that community, they get rid of them, and they exist in this interesting place, but it works for them, and everybody's there, and it's like this weird niched thing, right, that may not be for everyone, but for them Kinky. It's wonderful, right? And there's another one, there's another like biome, is kind of using that word probably wrongly here, but there's another kind of bubble where people don't want technology, but because they're part of this larger like socio-political structure, they do have to vote, and so they have it like just they have like this voting mechanism like enabled in their brains via like a little chip or something, but that's it. Otherwise they're farmers, and they do all this stuff, and everybody lives happily ever after, right? Like that would, to me, that like would be amazing. You can go do wherever you want to do in that particular place that meets your specifications, and if not, you can go start your own. Brilliant. How realistic is that? I don't know. That's certainly not on the planet. I don't think that's possible. Maybe in the future, maybe we'll be in this rather wonderful Reynolds universe. I mean, lots of crap happens there too. That's why he writes the stories. But I digress. What I would say is, going back to like, what is a well-functioning society? Does it have to be 100%? Or are we talking like 80 to 90? Like, what does well mean? And I think, to me, a well-functioning society would be most of the people are doing A-okay. They're contributing. They are happy to be there, or content. They are able to grow and improve. They're able to help other people. It's interesting you mentioned like a justice system, and when I was answering this question in my head, that never even occurred to me. I just assumed everybody would just like be cool, bro. But I realized people do shitty things, and then you have to figure out a way to deal with that. But I would say, much to what you said too before, kind of laying the tracks to know what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. For me, the number one factor is education, and I'm talking about appropriate education, right? Not just math and reading, but like mental, emotional education. Really teaching the children those tracks, like giving them the tools that they can then use to continue to be successful in their own lives and in that society. And I feel like appropriate education is lacking almost everywhere in the world. And I also mean by appropriate education, tailored education, because not everybody learns the same. Not everybody gets information the same way. So,
which is a big issue in the U.S. too. We even see that those divisions of education, and people are like, oh, well, you're uneducated and stupid. Well, that may not be the case, and most people don't choose to be dumb. It's just, it's based off their educational system of the city, the state, what resources are provided, etc.
And that's not to say that everybody who is well-educated, quote-unquote well-educated,
is also smart.
Is also smart. Right. But that's, or that they just because they know something doesn't mean that they will utilize it in the correct way, quote-unquote.
In the honorable way.
In the honorable way. But I do think that it's a cornerstone, because like it is hard when you don't know something, when you don't understand something. It's hard to be successful at anything that has to do with the knowledge that you lack, Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important to be mentally, emotionally, and then intellectually wise, which is a tall feat. Like, I mean, that's a tall order. But I don't feel like we put all of that into our kids at the right stages. The other thing then I would say would be, and this is sort of...
Can they be taught this
equal.
through a device? Like, can we shove a phone in their face?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's one way to teach some things. It is not the only way to teach that thing.
Wow, mind blown.
I'm just saying. And then the other factors that I feel are equally important are, safety, providing safety for people, which actually maybe that is my justice system. I don't know. But providing safety, appropriate resource distribution. Again, people talk about equality, and equality is tricky in terms of, like some people need more help, some people need help in different ways, so it's hard to be like, oh well, I gave $100 to this person and this other person, but one of the people did amazing things with the $100, the other person didn't. It's like, okay, well, maybe the other person didn't need $100. Maybe they needed more, less, something else completely different, not money. So, when I talk about resource distribution, it depends on the society. But again, it's sort of like that appropriate education for everyone. Different styles of learning. There's different styles of needing resources, like in Conan Exiles, right? If you're a level higher and you've put points into your attribute that makes you metabolize food faster, you need less food to survive. And so it means, it doesn't mean that, okay, you can't get the same amount of food, but to get an equal, quote unquote, appropriate resource distribution, maybe you need something else now to continue surviving. It isn't the same amount of food anymore. If that follows, if you guys follow. I don't know, I think I'm going off track. But there's that. And then the last thing that I would say is an important factor is also just contribution opportunities, like work opportunities. Because I feel like that you get to a point where, you've learned all the stuff that you've learned, and you've played around with stuff, and you've done all the things, and maybe you've reached a plateau where it doesn't feel, like, it's sort of like when you stay home for, a month off from work. You've played all your games, you've eaten all your food, you've slept all the time. And for some people, that's great. And for some people, it starts to feel not great anymore, right? Like you want to do something else, something more, right? And I think that contribution in whatever that way, however small, however big, however long, but feeling like you are creating something or adding to something, because I think creation, as we talked about earlier in one of the questions we've asked, right? Humans also create. We don't always just destroy. Right? So I think that there's an inherent need in us to create, and that comes at different times for different people, depending on where they are in their life journey, as it were. Mm-hmm. And I think there's actually there were some psych books that go through some of these this hierarchy of this like life journey that you have, and that typically they tend to come in like decade-long spurts usually, and that's why, when you're younger, you're sort of in your education phase, and then as you get older, you sort of move into the other phases, and then towards the later stages of your life, or as you sort of surpass some of those other stages, a lot of people say that they have this feeling, this need to create. It's actually, and they point to philanthropists, who do have all the resources, all of the things, they've done all the stuff, quote unquote. They feel this need to do something else. And so, they'll donate, they'll create charities, they'll do this, they'll have children, so on and so forth.
So basically you're saying that for a well-functioning society, it should also have elements that don't inhibit, but actually help the creation process flourish, whatever that might be. So yes. Having opportunities, having a foundation there for people to create opportunities, or at least in general, just to create something that will help people overall, because it's innately a part of us.
Yes. I mean, I would venture to even say that this need to, leave a legacy or create something is, in some respects, what sets us aside from just being an animal who's trying to survive, mm-hmm. but rather, something maybe one step.
Because we're able to implement something that has more of a long-term effect overall, rather than just like a daily, weekly sort of situation.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And, a lot of people in chat, too, are having a lot to say, which is great. Trunk is saying, a society functions well if the average living conditions of all improve without over-depleting the resources it has. So, yeah, you could look at it like, for instance, many of these, again, going back to games, but many of these strategy-based games, right, where it's like, okay, you are given a certain amount of food, you are given a certain amount of resources, and you have to see how to make that stretch and how can you increase those resources over time as well. So I think it's in that sense having that ability, that foundation to be able to create, because without being able to create, you won't be able to keep up with the society as it grows, potentially as it grows, and therefore, you will then deplete or over deplete the resources, thus then leading to a potential extinction of said society. He also says, too, the most important factors are justice, which includes fairness and equal opportunity for me. Discussion, we are better in discourse than we are on our, and knowledge to have a basis for said discussions to arrive at a good way to improve for all. So basically, having an open forum, being able to discuss, being able to not only understand, but make sure that things that are implemented are fair and of equal opportunity. And to make sure that the knowledge is there, that people are educated and informed, and with that will lead to improvements over time, which is also very important.
Indeed. And Trunk mentions having been off work for a month, I could happily have continued for at least 6 more. I would venture to say, and don't take this the wrong way, but I would say that maybe work is not as fulfilling or as exciting as maybe I would hope for someone when they are at work. Yes. Because I in my really well functioning society, I would want everyone to, the work that they do would be fulfilling and would be something that they look forward to. And I realize, work, it doesn't mean that it won't have stress, and it doesn't mean that it'll always be peachy keen and rainbows and butterflies. But overall, you tend to look forward to it most of the time, more so than not, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those joining us, welcome. Of course, we are taking on the 35 questions you probably never asked yourself, and kudos if you have. We've gone through questions 16 and 17, and now we're moving on to question 18. And again, we are looking for your feedback as well, your thoughts based on these questions. So feel free to treat it as if we're asking you the question directly as well. Just keep in mind, though, we are looking for actually serious answers. So if you're looking to troll or goof around, again, hey, thanks for stopping by, but there are plenty of other channels for you to stop by in, so thank you very much. But again, we're just looking to have some fun, have a really good conversation here today. We usually take on left brain topics, right brain topics, so everything from the arts to education to the sciences to technology and so much more. And we decided to do this, and we've had a great response from folks just to kind of share their thoughts, their philosophies, and everything else. So we are going to be moving on here with question 18, which is, why are so many people why are there so many people who are lonely? And this is a two-parter. So not only why are so many people lonely, but also why is it so hard for people to make real connections when almost everyone wants to make real connections? So of course we hear about this, right? Where people say, well, I have no friends, I want to connect with more people. But at the same time, some people seem to be sort of anti-connection, right? It's like as soon as they get the opportunity to create said connections, that might be actually something that seems more like an obstacle to them that they don't want to have to deal with. So there is kind of that factor. And we have a lot of lonely people, yet we say we're so much more connected right now in 2018, thanks to things like Twitch, thanks to the internet overall, thanks to the growth and flourishing of smartphones and apps and social media sites, Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and what have you. So why is it that so many people seem to be lonely in a way? Or they say they have connections, but maybe they're just more superficial and thus can still lead them to be lonely in some form or fashion. And again, why is it so hard to actually make real connections with individuals? And I know we've kind of talked about this both on stream and off stream during the talk show. Sometimes even during game streams. A lot of our game streams seem to lead into conversations too, depending on where chat takes it. But I would say that, I think for the most part, somehow, and I don't know where, I don't know, we could say many different things have caused this, but I feel like for the most part, most people feel lonely because they feel like, even though they want connections, they want friends, they see the end goal, people are too afraid of actually investing the time in the process to reach said end goal. They just want the end goal. So the process of working up to that, in the sense of just initially starting conversations with people, engaging with them on a daily basis or on and off basis or what have you, being willing to listen rather than just talk. Those things I feel like for many people feel like a lot of work, and overall they tend to want to avoid that, or they're just not sure on the process. They feel like they're kind of floundering a bit during that process, and thus kind of being in their own way in order to get to that end result, which is feeling close with people, right? Having close connections, close relations. So I think that somehow that portion in our mind that doesn't want to take on the work, the procrastinator in us maybe, or I don't really want to use the word laziness by any means, but it could also just be like overexertion in so many other things, because so many other things demand our attention. Even though we can do things faster and more efficiently, that also means that there are more things to do in the day, and that can take away from that process, or we feel too tired to take on that process of truly making those connections in a way. At least that's what comes to me initially from hearing this question, because again, we did review these questions, but we wanted to make sure not to come up with like kind of a stump speech, if you will, for these questions. Because we wanted to give you really, as best as possible, a very natural response to these. Let's see here. And why is it so hard? So yeah, I think that's some of it. Some of it's the exertion. Some of it's just not knowing really how to go about it. We get it in our own heads, get in our own way. But also I think there's just so many things demanding our attention and demanding us to do something for them, that after a while, it's like we feel like, what about me? Well, do something for me, because again, it's like companies want your money because they want to continue paying their people, right? They want to continue paying their CEOs. They want to continue paying their investors, so they're all about like, give us money, give us money. You got the bill collectors and the charge cards and everything else saying, give me, give me, give me, give your time, do this. And I think some of it too is also like what's considered honorable in society, where a lot of times, we have these big ideals of like, well, you should give everything, to this organization or this belief or this or that. And it's a lot of freaking pressure. But again, too, it's like you have to also be able to invest in yourself a bit. And if you don't feel like you have the time, the energy, or whatnot, you expect that from other people. And I feel like that can also get in the way because they're expecting the same thing. So again, now we're doing more of the talking rather than the listening. We're, looking at a glass that's filled and we keep pouring more into it, hoping that it'll hold something. So I think maybe as I'm working through this here, I think that's a bit of the obstacles that get in the way of that. So, we are ever connected, but yet it's superficial. And the process itself is either something where we feel exhausted for, or we're not just really familiar with, or what have you. So
would you say that they are more people who feel lonely now than there were 200 years ago? In terms of, I guess, maybe a percentage of world population? Or would you say that there's more people who feel lonely in different areas of the world? 'Cause I know you mentioned, sort of some of it being, related to all of the things that are around us, which to me feels a little bit modern, like a modern thing.
Right.
I guess. And that's why it's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's difficult too, because I think it is very different. I mean, that's the point. I think it's like when someone says, okay, well, what do you prefer more, film or theater? It's like there are similarities, but they're very different at the same time. So to really compare them wouldn't be fair. Because even though, like I said, we are very well connected, and in a way, a lot of people utilize Twitch as their way of getting that social interaction, of feeling that they're not alone, that there's someone else right there who's listening or who is talking to them and thus connecting in a way. That wasn't around 200 years ago, right? And plus the understanding of communities all around you in the sense of the world was very limited. Really all you knew 200 years ago, for instance, we know people thanks to Twitch and other resources from Germany, from Sweden, from Norway, from Brazil, from Israel, from, all over. And at the same time, 200 years ago, that was a very, 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 very rare thing. And really who you knew was the person down the block, was the person next door, was the person across the street. So, it's difficult because it's like, even though we're connected, a lot of times you can look at either thing and go, well, the smaller population would be tougher because if you don't feel like you're accepted by anyone, that's like your whole world, right? But at the same time, from a technological standpoint, we can see everyone else having good times, having fun, having things we don't have, and thus feel very lonely because we feel disconnected from it as well. Even if those photos or those posts are inflated or even completely fallacious, it still hits us in some form or fashion. And so I think, like, overall, again, it's kind of like saying, okay, well, what's the better apple, an apple or an orange? It's like, well, I mean, an apple's an apple, an orange is orange, so you're going to pick the apple percent. It's just very hard to try to compare the two, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because society, even just 200 years ago, I say just, but if you really look at the timeline here, it's just so very different. What was acceptable, what wasn't, what we had access to, what we don't have access to, both from a good thing, from a positive perspective and a negative perspective. Because having more doesn't mean that you're automatically better off, right? That also means that it comes with new stressors, new situations, and new negative connotations that we didn't know existed. So I think it's difficult. It's very difficult to compare.
Yeah, and lonely also, to me, doesn't mean that you're just alone, because I know plenty of people who prefer to be alone, physically or
reading a book or doing something else by themselves, right?
And they don't feel lonely. Whereas, I think as Mario Man mentioned, you could be in a crowd and feel lonely. So yeah, lonely is something that is, I think, certainly less about the physical sense and more in the emotional and mental sense, right? So, right, exactly. Nowadays, we can connect to way more people, way more instantly, way more frequently than ever before. And in a way, even though their virtual presence isn't physical, it is in a way could be considered physical, but you could still be very lonely in a lot of other respects as well.
Oh yeah, and actually Mario Man 2 mentions that some of which is influenced by like social anxiety and depression. And there are many articles that you will read saying, well, social anxiety and depression seem to have spiked since, let's say, 200 years ago, right? That, we're seeing more of it. So evidently, the more connected we are through all this gadgetry and this technology, it could actually mean that we are worse off. But in the same respect, we also record, document, and everything and evaluate mental health very differently, though in the U.S. not enough still, but very differently than we did 200 years ago. I mean, it was to a point, too, where even back in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, they were still putting those considered mentally insane and unstable and dangerous with people who had mental retardation, who had Down syndrome, who had other mental issues, because they didn't separate the two. They didn't realize that there was really a clear distinction at the time. And that was just the era we were in, unfortunately, at that point in time, where we just, society overall did not know enough about like mental health to do that. So it's really hard to say whether, has it increased or has it always been there? It just wasn't properly recorded. But overall, not to diminish the fact that it still has a massive impact as well, right? Social anxiety, depression, many different obstacles that you can face mentally impact that very much so. And so I think that's an interesting point to think of too, and to question and try to figure out is like, what kind of came first, and has it always been here, or is it something that is increasing and growing? Because our populations have also grown drastically too. So it's like, is this sense or is the ratio of mental health issues or obstacles that we face, is it really consistent, or has it actually clearly shown that no, it's leaps and bounds, it's not just because of an increase in population or anything like that, right? So it's tough, but it definitely has a serious impact, though, on why people can feel lonely even when they're in a room full of people, and why they don't feel like they have connections with anyone, too. That does have a major thing to play for many people.
And before I answer, I'm going to just take some time to read what we have in chat, because there's a lot of good points that I want to get to as well. Smitty says, people... why there are so many people who are lonely, because people are talking online more and in person less. People need human interaction and a sense of touch. In social media, it's not quite the same. And that is, it's a good, interesting point too. Speaking of, what was recorded before and what wasn't. This explosion of technology in the past few years, decades, has made it hard for us to even evolve quickly to catch up to it, right? Like our brains didn't have the chance to process all of the information that we are bombarded with on a daily basis. There's no time, between work obligations, projects, home maintenance, whatever it is, finding shelter, finding food. There's no time to just sit and be with yourself and sort of like defragment your brain every day, sometimes. And so, yeah, it's hard to really determine too, was this something that sort of just, for lack of a better term, plagues humankind, or is it something that's really skyrocketed because of the stresses that we have put on ourselves?
Yeah, so it seems like almost like social media is the crutch of communications. It's like you can use it, but that doesn't mean that's going to solve the issue of really just in the end connecting with someone. And so it can be it can be a great way of initially creating a handshake or to help further a conversation, but it's not maybe the best way of truly diving deep into a conversation, which if anyone jumps on Reddit or Twitter, you will see that the internet is not the best way of diving into a conversation.
Fused Fear says, for a lot of people, it's the fear of being judged harshly, be it for how they look, what they do, something they've done in the past, that stops them from attempting to make connections with other people. So it's that experience, it's what you've been through, that and the fear of how you may be perceived, that can basically stop you from trying to make connections with other people. You may know how to, you may not want to.
Mm-hmm.
Basically. And Red Siskin, more people in solitary life when it should be the other way. And I would have to respectfully disagree, because I really enjoy being by myself. It sort of recharges me in a way. I love reading a good book, or writing, or sleeping. Sort of hanging out outside. I like being with my own thoughts. I don't typically, not that I don't have a lot of, sometimes when I'm by myself, it's quiet. It's sometimes very quiet in my brain, which is really nice. And I think I'm lucky that I am able to have that, because I have at times not have that, and it sucks royally. But I do enjoy being by myself, and sometimes when I don't have that time to myself, it's not good for me, and it's not good for anyone else around me, because it feels like I can't get a hold of myself, like I can't defragment my own brain. I don't have that time, and it's stressful actually being around people, because I can feel their emotions, and I can sense all their stuff, and it's just I just want to turn it off. So it's actually really nice to get away from all of that, and I never feel lonely when I'm by myself, when I choose to be by myself in that way. I think the times that I've experienced this loneliness that we are talking about, for me, it's been when I felt like there was not a single person who understood me, or I felt that cared about me, whether it was true or not, right? I'm sure there was at least one person who did, but from my perception, it just felt like I was emotionally, mentally alone, even if I was surrounded by people, even if I interacted with them, even if they, talked with me every single day, like if you go to work, or if they're outside, at the supermarket or something like that. It just felt like it was this profound void of having anybody that I could interact with in a way that they really understood who I was. Not that I understood myself 100% of the way, but I just felt like I couldn't make a connection with anyone that way. And I did desperately wanted to, but it also felt like I don't think I was necessarily at those times afraid of opening myself up and sharing who I was with someone. It just didn't feel like I found anybody who was interested in hearing it.
That's a good way of looking at it too, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, and I think we all have some spectrum of that fear that Fuse you're talking about, with people judging us, and so that, I don't think that ever really goes away, even if you are feeling like you're in a trustful, safe space with other people, because we're human, and I think that's part of our need to survive, right? It's you just don't know. You can't read what the other person is thinking, right? You can't read their thoughts, so you just don't know how they're going to react, even if you think you know them 100% of the time. But regardless, I never felt I was going to deal with repercussions of what that person would think of me, but I just couldn't. I would just feel like I couldn't find that person, whether it was a friend or a family member or a significant other. Which is why I think a lot of people also turn to pets. I mean, for a long time, I used to joke that only my cat gets me, but it felt very true to me. Like, my cat, even though she didn't actually understand me when I was talking to her, felt like she could, like, understand me, you know. And then I put all of my, like, care and love into that animal, because it was easier than trying to find somebody to understand me. And that actually helped me in dealing with my loneliness, having my cat. And when he died, that all went away again, and that was really rough. So I think, for me, why I think it's also hard for people to make real connections, is a little bit of blend of, I think, what everyone else is saying. It's part education, part not knowing how to, right? For a variety of reasons. Whether it's mental and emotional obstacles that you face, or experiences that you've had in the past. And then it's also I got to the point where I just stopped trying. I decided that, I was going to save myself from feeling lonely. And I made that conscious decision. And I found things that gave me joy in doing them by myself. And over time, the loneliness factor went away, because I was able to. It was twofold. I poured myself into activities that brought me joy because of the activity itself, but I also met people while doing those activities that I would have never met otherwise, and found some of those connections through that. I always say to you guys in Twitch, that I feel like I finally found a community where I love interacting with everyone here, and I feel like, most of the time we all get each other in a way that I have not experienced anywhere else. So yeah, that's my answer. I guess.
Let's see, and just kind of catch up with chat too, because there's a bunch of stuff in here right now. Let's see here, just to kind of get through. Let's make sure as we kind of scan through. Mario Man says, I think people judge me as hard as I judge myself. I'm lonely because I tend to isolate myself to not only protect myself, but to protect others from me. I can be pretty negative, so I feel my isolating people that I can't influence others negatively. Which, yeah, I mean, that does absolutely happen. I can definitely, connect to that for sure. I know that when I was younger, I actually had a girl in one of my classes back in, I don't know, middle school or something like that, who was like, why do you think you're better than everyone? And I looked at her and said, what do you mean? And she's like, well, you don't really talk to anyone. And I thought, well, I never thought about that. Like, not talking to someone could have that sort of thought process that, oh, well, then that means that you must think you're better than someone. It never even occurred to me, right? I was like, oh, okay, that's a different perspective. All right, and it's a fair perspective in a way too. But I was like, well, no, I just thought that you thought that, or that, other people think that they're better than me. So it's like, it didn't feel right to talk to people who I feel wouldn't like me anyway. You know what I mean? Like that sort of kind of negativity, like in a way, it's like I'm saving myself, protect myself from other people who probably don't like me anyway, sort of thing, or don't care about me anyway. So what's the point?
Which is a little self-sabotaging.
It's not a little, it's absolutely self-sabotaging.
So, I mean,
and
yeah.
right. And that comes into play, right? It's like, at the same time though, how much are people really truly lonely because of the situations they are surrounded by, but how much of it also is internally creating that? And I think that's all a question that we should take in for ourselves when we're feeling lonely, when we're feeling isolated, when we're feeling just completely, like a fish in a glass bowl, basically, and everyone else is on the outside looking in, or you're on the outside in a way looking out to them, but I think that's an important question to ask too, because I think that helps you then move forward and progress out of that, hopefully, and help yourself to then be able to make those connections. And I think also just pressure in general of like, well, what is considered a connection? Like, are you supposed to be like best friends or something? Or are you looking at just
Insta BFFs?
Yeah, like, are you Insta looking for a wife or a husband? Like, put things in perspective here and make sure that your ideals aren't too idealistic, I guess. Don't shoot for the stars in a sense. Just, be happy with progression with each and every footstep and really be able to appreciate it. And I think that can also, at least initially, help against some of that. Let's see here as we keep kind of going on.
Some great conversation in chat. Thank you, everybody.
And welcome, Irony Golem. Thanks for stopping by. You say that if you tell everyone that they are smart and special, yeah, I bet there are a lot of unhappy people who are in fact just unspecial. And that's an interesting thing, right? Because people put different perspectives on words, and we've talked about that too. Language is pretty powerful for how we feel, for our overall belief system, for our psyche, our psychology. I personally would say that, that's fair, right? We do give high expectations to people of like, you should do this. Like, by the time you're 21, you should be graduated from a 4-year university, or 22, you should be graduated from a 4-year university, with the highest of grades. You should have a significant other. You're married. You have the white picket fence and the dog and the cat and the kids and the fish and the whatever the hell else you got. And a minivan with, the soccer and taking the kids there and giving them ho-hos and tang or whatever bullshit makes you happy. But and I think too, like if you then don't achieve those standards, you're like, oh yeah, you're gonna feel like crap. That's absolutely true too. You're gonna feel isolated and lonely because you're gonna think, well, everyone else has that. When really, if you actually look at the situation, maybe even talk to some of these people, you realize that they don't either.
No.
A lot of these are actually very unachievable, and so. Yeah, that can totally come into play as well. How we set up other people through our language, which then impacts, again, our beliefs and how we put those beliefs onto others. A lot of people growing up can understand that if they had parents that way, that were very pushy about or very strict about certain things, they can absolutely agree with that.
All right, Red Siskin says, in the 1980s, you had to visit friends, get out of the house, and be social, even if you had social anxiety. But now, you can just open Facebook, send messages, use other apps. Yeah, and I think that's interesting too, because back then, like you said, you sort of had to, I guess in a way, force yourself to like live in your anxiety, right? Because you had to go meet people, and otherwise you just didn't have that same interaction. Whereas nowadays, luckily and unluckily, you don't have to do that anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because, yes, it may make you feel a little bit better because you don't get out of your comfort zone, but at the same time, you don't get out of your comfort zone, and so it's harder and harder to get out of it later, and you might find yourself later and later that it's harder to achieve maybe some of the goals that you want for yourself, which may include finding other people to share your life with, or finding ways to make yourself feel fulfilled as well. So it's like a catch-22, right? And I mean, we talk about this a lot, how technology is a catch-22 in general. I remember when I came here from the from Romania, I was 9. I had 2 years of English learned in school, and my mom looked at me. She's like, "Okay, well, you gotta go outside and play with these kids." And I was like, "Fuck no, that's not gonna happen." Because we came during the beginning of a summer. She's like, "Well, you're gonna meet these kids in school in September. Like, just go out there. They're right outside. There's like 5 girls." She's like, "Go out there and like play with them." And I was like, "No, also no, and the hell no." And she made me go out there, right? She made me go out there. Literally, she pushed me out the door, locked the door behind. So I was like, fine, fuck it, I'll go down there. And so I was forced to interact with the girls. And the first interaction went horribly wrong. But every day she was like, "Nope, you're going outside, you're talking with these people." And it made me have to talk to these girls and endure all their crazy crap. And, you know, I don't know. Did that help or did that not help? It certainly moved me in a direction that I wouldn't have gone by myself. And I probably would have just stayed at home and watched TV and read books. And that I was content with that. I was totally fine. So yeah, it's very interesting, you know, that ability to kind of live in your own social anxiety and not have to do anything with it if you don't want to. See, going through some more chat here.
Crazy Doc says, classic introverted trait, needing that alone time to recharge, can completely relate. And it's like, yeah, even if you're completely introverted, you know, or I should say you're very introverted, there's also that point where it's like you need to also there's also that point in time where you need to connect with people, right? You need to be able to have those times. It's just not as needed, I guess, or as greatly needed as those that are extroverted, right? Which thrive in those conditions. And so, you know, there's still that need. We're still all social beings. It's just on different levels. And we also socialize in different ways too. And so that's something to always keep in mind, that to a point there isn't always a right and wrong of socialization. Again, there are some based on extreme events, or extreme circumstances or actions. But, you know, in a generalized sense, there isn't a truly right or wrong in a way. You know, there's just different levels of willingness to socialize, and that is okay. And I think it's up to us to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. You know, and be able to respect that in others as well as in ourselves, and not just be like, oh, that person, you know, can so easily just walk in a room and talk to people and do this and that. Why can't I be that? And then you beat yourself over and over again. You beat yourself up constantly about it, you know, and that actually makes the situation worse at that very moment in time. But it also makes every other social interaction after that, outside of that time period, even worse, because that still rests in the back of your mind. And I think, again, it's just because of us. It's like, well, I'm not like that person, and that is okay. You know, we all socialize differently, and that is all right. So I think that's really important as well to understand and be comfortable with. So if you're an introvert, be comfortable with being an introvert. You're an extrovert, be comfortable with being an extrovert. That is totally fine.
Well, and also, you know, much like with social media, where we do look and see sort of the highlight reel of someone's life, I feel like, you know, at a party or somewhere on TV, you're also seeing a version of that person that may or may not be real, right? You know, I've been told that I'm a very engaging speaker. I am frightened out of my wits to be in front of people talking. Like, I hate it. Like, right before I have to, like, go up and do a presentation, like my vision blurries. Like, I don't even know what I'm going to talk about. I panic. It's horrible. And if I could find an excuse to leave, I would. And then I get up there and I sort of just work through it. And it's terrifying, and I feel like I stumble over my words, and my sentences don't make sense, and I'm going over here, going over there. And then right after my presentation, someone will come up to me and be like, wow, that was amazing. You're so good at this and da-da-da-da and all this. And I'm like, really? Because I felt like I was bombing up there. And I have such a negative perception of what happened, which is, you know, sort of like what Evin was saying. You know, you kind of like, you can tend to get lost in your own head and think that one thing is happening when it might not be the case. And, you know, and over time, it just gets easier a little bit. But yeah, that person that you're potentially looking at, you know, they're doing something that maybe you feel like you can't do. They may be also struggling to do that. But they have pushed themselves through, or they're forced to go out there and socialize with those kids. And they gotta, you know, their survival has kicked in and they're just trying to do it. But it might not be something that they're happy with. They might not be something that they're good at, that they feel that they're good at. And I guarantee you they have somebody else that they're looking up to in some form or fashion. And they're saying, I wish I could be like that person. So yeah, this comparison that the social media is making us do is And not that it's making us do it, it's giving us the portal by which we already do it naturally, but now it's like right there.
I think it's like everything else that we've talked about. There's technology, and is technology inherently bad or good? Not really, no. I mean, again, it's based on who uses it and how they use it or how they abuse it. And so it's really the user behind it. I mean, there are maybe some safety precautions or elements that maybe we should implement knowing the abuses that can happen. But overall, yeah, it's just based on how people abuse it. And unfortunately, people have turned social media, and when I say people, I mean businesses, marketers, and so forth, have played with emotional marketing in the sense of like, oh, well, you need to belong, because they understand that sense of belonging and that sense of loneliness that we're talking about, and have unfortunately inflamed it greatly thanks to social media and marketing overall. We could see this in print ads, actually. It's not just social media.
Right.
We could see it in print ads. We could see it in commercials. And we could see it now in commercials online and everything else. So it's rough. It is definitely rough because, again, the system gets manipulated and used in a way that people know, hey, well, this is how I can make money, not thinking about the long-term effects of the impact of the people that they're pushing this content out to, and that's unfortunate. Now, we are getting kind of close to the end of the show, but I do want to actually get to skip one of the questions just because I think we can get really in depth with that. I don't want to go too deep to a point, but I think it might be good to actually hit on question 20 just to kind of get some general thoughts out on this, because we've discussed this pretty much at length in other ways too. But the question 20 will be, what is the purpose of art in society?
To make you feel less lonely.
I mean, that can be right. That can be that human connection again. And of course, you could say, well, what is considered art, right? Are we talking about fine arts? Like, are we talking about like sculptures and paintings and sketchings and what have you? Or, are we talking about all forms of art that we now consider it, such as even like digital art, graphics and design, even things that are of entertainment value that have maybe also an educational purpose to it, everything else like messaging, whatnot. Would you consider that art too, such as film and theater, and also not that that's a digital media, but just to make sure to throw that in there too, but theater, film, even live streaming like we are now, or podcasting, could that be considered an art, right? And then if we do consider that an art, then we should make sure that when we answer this, that we include that as well. That all these elements, what is the purpose of them in our society then?
The purpose, Trunk asks. You are kidding. It has many uses in society. What are the purposes of art? Although one could argue that there is a one singular answer that encompasses all the answers. One could argue. Am I answering this question here?
Oh, no, you were going off of what people were saying initially in chat, so I figured I'd let you finish. I'm not Kanye West, okay?
I'm going to let you finish.
I'm going to let you finish, but first, Beyonce is art, okay? And Beyonce creates a purpose with it. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, anyway. That's a whole other debate on a whole other stage.
Red Siskin says, actually, for me, streaming is not art. That's interesting. So the definition of art, according to our handy-dandy dictionary, is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Given that definition,
he's based off that specific definition, right?
Which a dictionary provided, would you say that streaming is not art still? And it's totally okay if you did.
Well, I think it's based on the quality or the value of it, right? Because there's also like really shitty art out there too that I probably wouldn't really consider art. as well. When I say art, I mean like fine arts, for instance. Like there can be amazing paintings that really seem to work well and really hit on certain elements that need to and tell a story or do whatever it needs to do. And then there are ones where it's just like literally you dropped a paint can on a canvas and called it a day. And you hoped that someone would put additional value onto that by overthinking it and thus making it something so much deeper. So, it's like,
I believe you call that abstract work, right?
Not all. No. There's some good abstract work. But yeah, I think it's really hard though in a way. But I think overall though too, it's like, yeah, does it have that value? And I think for a lot of people, art has to have some kind of purpose or value to it, right? So, but it depends on what, right? Can you stare at it and it helps you to understand a connection or helps you to understand something better? Or is it the fact that it's a conversation in the art and how they deliver that conversation that is considered an art? Because then at that point, what you're saying then, if streaming to a point, if it actually has value and that's not an art, then storytelling is not an art. Spoken word poetry, in a way, is also not art. So it's like it's really dependent, right? I think then in the end of, are we looking at actual things that then we do just put value onto and we say that is art? Because that's how I look at it, right? I feel like if someone can leave with something feeling fulfilled, in a way, that is then or should be considered art. I think there are some things that are very fleeting and more so like fast food art is what I like to call it, where it's like, well, it fills you up for the time, it helps you kind of sustain, but it's nothing that will ever like change your life, get you to think, get you to really truly converse about something that's important. Or help you better understand a perspective you might not have access to otherwise. You know what I'm saying? So at least that's my kind of thought, is that the purpose of art really, in many respects, should at least is something that has value, that has those elements to it, that gets people to think, that gets people to understand people. Basically, as Shakespeare says, it's like it puts a mirror up to society in some form or fashion. Now, the reflection from that mirror may not always be very direct, right? It may not be blatantly obvious, but again, it is a version of that reality. And I think, too, like, especially with the visual arts, sometimes people, to kind of go off of the abstract art, sometimes people have to do something a little more abstract and not direct to actually get people to think about it, right? Because we've talked about this as well, whereas the more you use your mental processes to work through something, to think about something or think on something, the more memorable it is, the more you connect to it, and the more you understand it because you start putting it into your own words. So you're not just kind of force feeding someone a certain situation or a certain description or what have you. You're forcing them to really put it into their shoes now. And to really put it to their own words and figure out what is this, which then I think can have a larger impact than if you're just hand holding, which, I see Red Siskin mentions movies in 2018, not an art, which, yeah, it's like to a point, when you look at the films on a whole, I don't think individual elements of movies a lot of times are not art. I think there absolutely is an art to the things, whether it's the cinematography, and how they move throughout the space, how they've utilized the space and the colors and everything else. It could also be the lighting design, could be absolutely gorgeous and really set the mood, because lighting can have such an impact on the mood based on what we see.
Oh, cinematography, yeah, for sure. Definitely an art in my eyes.
Yeah, it's like, when we see someone in shadows in comparison to when they have full light on them, we get a very different emotional response from that. So I think there are certain elements that still, but I think overall, yeah, there are many films that I would put into, for example, into that realm of fast food art, where it's like, well, you give us money so we win, and then you get, more of like, not a change of life by any means, but kind of an excursion away from your life, which sometimes is really just enough for people, right? Just to kind of like, almost in a way, turn their brains off for like 2 hours, be forced to do that a little bit, kind of like how you said you need to down cycle, whether that's through reading or something else.
Down cycle.
For some people, when they down cycle, they just turn the brain completely off, which, to each their own. And sometimes that's just needed. I call that a nap, but some people call that watching a film.
I love downcycling all the way to a nap.
So yeah, I mean, I can get where you're going with that for sure, and I can agree, on certain elements there for sure.
Well, I think like Evil Duck mentions, that there's a technical meaning of art, but I think everyone has their own view on what art actually can and cannot be, and that in general it's subjective. And I agree with that. I do think that the perception of art is subjective, but I do think that there are types of art that are factual. For example, there's fine art. There's architecture is an art. Music is an art. Writing is an art. So there's performance arts, of course, like theater or film or streaming. I do think that there are the different types of art are not that they're like set in stone, but I think that there's different types of art that exist in our world, that then the perception of what is art and what isn't is subjective. Like we actually have an entire episode where we talk about an artist that set fire to some buildings, and for him it was a type of art. For other people it was arson. So I think that, and then the overall purpose of this broad art category in society, to me, is its purpose is to set us apart from, I guess, just simple animals, because that creativity and that skill and that expression is not something that you normally see in other animals on the planet. Not usually. Not to the extent, certainly, that humans produce art at.
I mean, yeah, I haven't seen a tiger analyzing the Mona Lisa anytime recently, or anytime at all. So yeah, you can see that,
But like birds building their nests, that's architectural art for sure. But I feel like they do it in some sense. They do it out of survival.
Whereas I think, then how do you amplify that beyond survival once you're set, right? Like you know how to make that foundation for survival to work, but then how do you grow that?
Right. Like building a fire, right, to keep warm is one thing, but building an elaborate fireplace, that fireplace would be something that I would consider at that point art. Yes.
Fuse says, I'm sure Tony the Tiger is a fine art antiquities collector when he's not shilling cereal. Oh my God. Yeah, that's a magical thing. And actually, Mario Man 2 says, I think cars are art, the looks, the sounds, and I can see that, right? The specific colors being utilized, the specific shapes, really like the goal of art, ideally, at least maybe from a perfect world scenario, is meant to invoke an emotional response, which then people can also say, yeah, but for instance, using your favorite shampoo could invoke an emotional response. Does that mean that shampoo is art? And it's like, yeah, it's not perfect, right? But I think
marketing on it can be.
But I think in a way though, basically what we would all probably agree with here is that anything that we've seen that we would consider art has emotionally impacted us in some way, has got us thinking, but we had some kind of an emotional trigger that happened. We had an emotional response that came out of seeing something or engaging with something that we probably would consider art. And I think that's definitely got to be a strong aspect of it. So whether it's a sculpture, a painting, a piece of music, whatever it may be, that it's got to have some sort of emotional value and emotional response to it to create that value. And actually, Irony Golem says too, what is a mint condition Tony box worth? Like the Tony the Tiger box, thousands, I'm sure. Yeah, it's like, we put value in all different things. And,
right.
Many people would consider that art in a way of some sort. because of, again, that emotional response to it. Or at least they had something that is probably close to, but maybe not exact to, an artistic emotional response, right? You know, like something in their life just reminded them, and it becomes more nostalgic. But I think it, even though I definitely wouldn't put it the same. I think if we're looking at it from a psychological point of view, they're actually kind of similar based on the emotional response we get from them. But I think people like to also go a hell of a lot deeper with art beyond just nostalgia, which I would agree too. I think I would lend myself more toward non-nostalgia based things as well, though art could be nostalgic as well in a way. You know, if your family took you to a museum every single week or something, and you just always ended up in the Monet section, so all of a sudden you just have this kind of nostalgic feeling around Monet paintings. You know, that, yeah, I mean, that can happen too, right? But I think though that on a base level, psychologically speaking, when it comes to chemical releases and everything else, there can be something that's similar in the way we, I guess, in how we engage emotionally with art in comparison to how we engage with things that are nostalgic. But I still go back to the sense of, I really do think it is something that gets you thinking, that it communicates. It's got to be something that really truly communicates in a way that also gets an emotional response. Yeah, I don't know. But there's just so many versions of art too. But I think the purpose of it, though, because again, we're also getting into the nitty gritty of, well, what is, which is damn hard. I remember, so in college, you know, one of my degrees was in theater. And of course, I had a theater history teacher who's, you know, trying to be a smartass in a way. And his last question on the final exam was, what is theater? And as long as you actually showed that you put thought into it, he gave you the points for that question. Because he knew, too, that it varies, right? It really, truly does in a way. So, but yeah, I think overall the purpose of it, though, is to tell a story, I think, in many respects. I mean, artists get inspired. They see something, they experience something, and then they go to their medium to put it out there.
Yeah.
And so right there, they're just like, I'm so excited about telling this story in what I'm in the way I know, that here it is. So I think it's just a form of storytelling, and we've been doing this for ages, right? I mean, the Iliad, Homer's Odyssey, these were all stories that were spoken before ever written. And the versions that we have now are versions that were finally documented much later, based on kind of this telephone game of storytelling, where it went down to one generation, to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation, so on and so on and so on. So I think in the long run, it's just about telling a story that people can emotionally connect with.
My backlit keyboard is telling me that I'm a badass gamer. That's the story it's spinning for me. I mean, it may not be a true story, but it is what it's spinning for me. For sure.
See, and we're just kind of catching up with chat here as well. All right. Cool, folks. Well, it is actually already over time as we're going into these things, and we want to thank every single person, whether you were lurking and hanging out with us / lurking and working, or if you were commenting in the chat. Again, we honestly cannot say thank you enough, because what we want are the conversations. We want to get these conversations going and talking, and just realizing there are different pathways and different ways of communicating and different ways of connecting to these different values, these different questions, these different theories, different philosophies. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for getting involved. Thank you for just hanging out in general. Hopefully you enjoyed yourselves, enjoyed the conversation, because that is the goal. It's not about just us talking at a camera, but talking with you and you talking with us directly. So thank you very much for getting involved, getting engaged. Again, we greatly appreciate it. And as we said, we do game streams as well. So when we're not doing the talk show every Saturday at 1 p.m. PDT, we are also game streaming. So we're doing Sundays 11 a.m. Tomorrow we'll actually be taking on more Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Monday as well, we'll be doing another game stream, 11 a.m. PDT, and then we'll have Tuesday and Wednesday off. Back on Thursday at 11 a.m. PDT for even more gameplay, where we'll be probably taking on even more Conan Exiles. So we'd love to have you join us. If you enjoyed what you saw, please feel free to hit the follow button, completely free of cost, of course, and it lets you know whenever we go live or whenever we post up updates or changes or anything that happens with the scheduling and with the streams, and that way you can be up to date on everything going on. And if you missed any bit of this conversation, we are on Podbean as well as iTunes, and we do put up the full episodes up there as well in audio format. Or also you can catch us on YouTube. We put up our recordings of this live stream at the beginning of every single week. So as of early next week, this will be up for you to enjoy as well. So please feel free to check out and subscribe to our YouTube as well, where you can get all that content, plus the game streams and a bunch of other highlights, reviews, unboxings, you name it, right there at youtube.com/c/MindMineTV. Other than that, anything else that you want to also hit up, Tatiana?
Thank you everybody for joining us. As always, awesome conversations in chat. Love to hear everyone's perspectives and talk through some of these things. So we'll see you guys tomorrow for game streams, next Saturday for the next talk show, and have a good one, y'all.